Welcome to Trifecta Collective, finding the root, where we dive deep into understanding and addressing root causes of chronic health issues so you can help and find healing inside and out, now and forever.
Hello, and welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root. I'm Megan Abbott, owner and founder of the holistic health practice, Trifecta Collective. Welcome to the podcast. So if you're watching this, you'll notice a couple things here. So I'm playing around with some background stuff. Don't know if I love it. We will see if this lasts. But also, once again, if you're watching, I have a very special t-shirt on with the name of the company, Trifecta Collective, and our Andy, our behind the scenes everything, my partner in crime kind of person, designed these for our whole team going into the new year. And I am so in love with this t-shirt. There's a whole thing on the back. We're going to be sharing some selfies of us, all four of us, wearing this shirt. And we're not, by the way, we're not actively selling these. This is just an internal thing. And it makes me so happy to have this. And it has our new branding colors on it and our fonts and all the things. And we've just been working so hard behind the scenes here we're going on 7 months here of total rebrand. We are almost done with our new website from a planning perspective, and then we are having someone build it. But this is we are up leveling pretty hardcore here and have spent a lot of time wrapping these things up. And so it's so nice to have this t-shirt with our colors and our fonts and all the things, and just to see a byproduct of some of the hard work that we've been really putting in for so long at this point. And when the website is actually done, we are going to be thrilled beyond, that doesn't even come close to what I actually feel in sharing all of that. So huge shout out to our behind the scenes, all around everything kind of person, Andy, for creating these for us. So super excited to be repping the company and just share our message even more, to be able to help more women be able to heal and feel good and know that they aren't crazy. So let's dive into today's topic, because I know a lot of women who experience chronic pain, chronic inflammatory issues, often feel super crazy and can be told by many types of practitioners and physicians and various other people that some of the stuff might be in their head. And I do get this feedback a lot. And so I thought it was valuable. I know I've done some various episodes on pain, chronic pain, root cause healing when it comes to chronic pain, lower back pain. But I want to talk a little bit more specifically, or almost less specifically, about chronic pain issues. But I really want to start from a basis of inflammation. And what is inflammation? And, we see this all the time. And by the way, this is marketed to us everywhere about how to reduce inflammation. What is inflammation? Like, you're inflamed. Like, this is if you have skin issues, your skin is inflamed. Like, just address the inflammation. And inflammation's a little different than I think that we're marketed to or initially told, or the way that Western medicine talks about inflammation. And so I wanted to define what really is inflammation. And I want to talk about acute and chronic inflammation, different ways that this can show up in the body. I also, as always, love to dive into testing and what does it look like? What are we looking at? And what do different inflammatory markers mean? And what are some markers that maybe some people don't think about when it comes to inflammation, and how does that actually show up? And what are we looking at? How does this really look? So very excited to dive into this topic. So inflammation by itself, if we just say like inflammation as a whole, is a response that our body goes through to something. And what I mean by that, and why I think this is important as a starting point, is inflammation is a byproduct of something. The issue isn't the inflammation itself. The question is, as always, how and why did the inflammation happen? And if we're feeling inflammatory issues, and once again, I'm going to talk about what this might look like, what do we do? And do we take an anti-inflammatory? Do we use like natural anti-inflammatories? What are natural anti-inflammatories? What does this really look like? And how might we look at this from a little bit of a different perspective than, say, Western medicine? So when we think of inflammation, we can think of kind of two routes that this can go in. And sometimes it is both, by the way. We can think of acute inflammation. This one's a little bit easier to kind of understand. So let's say that you trip and fall doing something, bang your knee on something, whatever we want to call it. Maybe you're walking, you fall, you slip. It's the wintertime as of the recording of this episode. You slip on some ice, you fall onto your knee starts to swell. That would be an acute inflammatory response. Your body is swelling up in a very specific area as a result of a very specific event that occurred. And it should, within a couple of days, go down. And there are some things that we can do to get that acute inflammation to go down. The standard protocol used to be, if you're familiar, if you've been in the health and wellness related field for a while, you may remember RICE. Rest, ice, compress, elevate. And that was the general rule of thumb of like, this is how you treat an acute issue. Once again, like something starts to swell up, you rest it, you ice it, you maybe provide some compression, maybe you're wrapping like an ace bandage around it, and then you elevate. In case you don't know, that has actually been retracted. That is no longer recommended. And I do think like there is some validity to some of it. I think resting an acute injury for, man, it depends on the person, a few days to a couple weeks, not a bad idea, depending on what happened. Like for me, let's say back in the day, I was in a car accident and my back started to hurt within a few hours. Yeah, resting my back and not doing like a heavy deadlift workout 2 days later, probably a smart idea. Probably smart not to really push it and allow it some extra time to rest. Ice, ice is really interesting. Depending on who you talk to, if something is swelling, that may indicate ice. However, with most other injuries now, and this is where I can have some problems, especially with chiropractors who rely on ice so much, and I think it's such a huge disservice to so many people, sometimes heat is actually recommended. And the reason why, and I talk to so many people, especially with more chronic type issues, I'll say one of the most common ones is right at the bottom of your neck, at the top of your shoulders where your traps are. And if you like touch like above your shoulders and like between your neck and your shoulder, right on that top part, it can get really tight. And even just like some gentle pressing can feel very tender to it because so many of us carry stress there. I have a lot of thoughts on that I'm not going to get into today, but it can become very tight. And a lot of times there are some muscle imbalances going on, but ice may not feel very good, especially once again, when it's a chronic issue. However, heat might feel very supportive because what is actually happening is the heat will bring extra blood flow to that area. Extra blood flow means more oxygen. Increased oxygen helps with the healing process. So that's why heat can sometimes often be a better option for some, not all, acute injuries. And for a lot of long-term injuries, I would say heat is often more beneficial than ice in many cases. Obviously, there are exceptions. However, I do think general rule of thumb is heat is often a better option with, once again, especially chronic type issues. So let's go back to the knee. So are we going to compress it? We probably want the body to let it do its thing. If we need to stabilize it, potentially, something like a sprained ankle, we may want to wrap up. Something else that is often used, especially in the physical therapy space, is KT tape. KT tape, if you've never used it, I've had most of my body KT taped at one time or another for a variety of things, mostly in physical therapy. I spent years in physical therapy after my car accident. And once again, I've had just about every place on my body KT taped. I would probably say like wrist and forearms would probably be the one exception, but like the entirety of my back, shoulders, knees, ankles, everywhere around my hips, even like through my abdomen, all of those things have been KT taped to death, essentially. KT tape can help to stabilize, especially when we are dealing with something a little bit more acute, and can help the body just as we're adjusting potentially movement patterns, like through something like physical therapy. This can help stabilize and this can help reduce pain. So that could be an option. Obviously, anti-inflammatories, things like NSAIDs, are natural anti-inflammatories that will reduce the inflammation. Temporary solution. Not a big fan of NSAIDs as a whole. If you've never looked at some of the symptoms or side effects as a result of long-term use, definitely look into that. And, like I also don't think if you need it here and there, like go for it. It's not the end of the world as long as you are supporting your body for the most part as a whole. So I do think that is something to take into account. How and when and how often are we using them? I'll say, there's higher strength anti-inflammatories as well. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I'll say I was on gabapentin for a long time, which is a very natural, like anti-inflammatory, a pretty strong one. You can argue it does some other things as well. Never made a major difference for me. Can be very challenging on the body. So there are a variety of things that can naturally hide or reduce inflammation. However, inflammation is the body's natural response to a stressor. And when we think about it like that, from an acute standpoint, okay, like if we need an NSAID, if we need some sort of over-the-counter prescription anti-inflammatory, short term, once again, acute should be short term. Not a huge deal. However, when something lasts long term, when we're having this long term inflammatory response, and this might be to an injury, this also could be a variety of other things. Things like common inflammatory responses, swelling in the body. A lot of people can blame circulation for swelling of the legs. Is this truly a circulatory issue? Yeah, absolutely in some cases. And I think for the most part, no. I think a lot of people stand on their feet a lot. I think a lot of people don't move a lot. And blood flow is not at optimal levels or is able to work in optimal ways, which can result in some swelling. I would also consider things like joint pain, especially for anyone under the age of, say, 75. Joint pain is not normal. We should not feel pain in our joints. Not normal. And that is a common way that inflammation can show up. Lymphedema can be an inflammatory response. Generalized, we'll say like pain discomfort can be an inflammatory response. And if you are watching this, you'll notice I touched like right by my armpit. Where I was going with this originally was we have a lot of lymph nodes in our armpits, and a lot of people that we work with will oftentimes have discomfort along a variety of their lymph nodes, and a lot of those are around the armpit. We also have a bunch in our like right under the jaw is probably the most common place. Doctors will always check your lymph nodes to see if they're swollen. That's an inflammatory response. But you also have lymph nodes that go all the way down. You have them around all around your chest. You have them in and around your brain area. And that can be an inflammatory response if there is tenderness in certain parts of the body like that. Potentially, we could even throw things like headaches or migraines into inflammatory issues. There's a lot of things that we could consider to be as a result of quote unquote inflammation. And we get a lot of people that will come to us saying, I have a lot of inflammatory issues. And one of the questions I always ask these individuals is, how does that show up for you? How do you feel your inflammation and how does that present? Because that's going to start to give me an idea of, okay, what symptoms are they contributing to inflammation? From a most basic, like human level, a lot of us know the term inflammation, and we may see, once again, joint pain, some swelling, discomfort in certain parts of our body as an inflammatory response. So what does that look like for you? What does that feel like for you? And then as we start to peel back those layers, we're going to get a better idea of how did this start? How and when did this start? What were probably contributing factors? And what really are the root causes of this inflammatory response? I also want to throw in a little bit of a side note here. Inflammation is a natural part of our body's responses. I don't think it is something to necessarily view bad by itself or thinking of it as something that needs to be corrected. For me, it's more of a signal. And this is why, once again, if you hurt your knee, if you hurt your back, use the NSAID. Don't go crazy with it. It can have some pretty significant long-term side effects, especially with high usage. Here and there, is it the best? No. And like, do what you need to do to get through your day. And at the end of the day, sometimes we have these things, like, use them. It's fine. Once again, as long as normally on a day-to-day basis, we're naturally supporting our body through the ways that it needs to be supported. But inflammation is a signal. It is a signal that is something is off, something or some things are off. And so the body's trying to repair itself through this inflammatory response. I will say, if we look at inflammation pathways, and for reference, in the initial program I went through, the nutritional, or one of the programs I have gone through, it was not the initial one. One of the many programs I have gone through is the Nutritional Therapy Association. And I remember going through that course, and there was a whole section on inflammation and the inflammatory response and how the body naturally goes through this process as an attempt to heal itself, which is so cool. The body is fascinating in what it can do and how it's always trying to stay in this state of homeostasis, the state of balance, state of optimization. And so it's like, when things are going wrong, the question I always think of is, what does the body need to be supported? The body's fully capable of healing given the right conditions. And the question is, what are those right conditions that it needs to be able to heal? And I will say, a big piece of this process, and I think with people who are a little bit younger than me, and for reference, I'm 36, may not have experienced the way that I remember this, but I know for most women that I talk to in their at least mid-30s and older, we remember a time when fat was the bad guy and everything was low fat, no fat. And during that whole process, and this is where the Atkins diet, really started to come in, and looking at all of these things. And low-fat diets are actually quite dangerous. Once again, if you haven't listened to any other episodes, you probably haven't heard me talk about this, but if you've listened to more than a few episodes, anywhere where I talk about nutrition, you know that protein is a required nutrient. Fat is the other required nutrient. And fats play a really big role in the body's process to reduce and get rid of inflammation. So, anyone who has a history of being on a low fat diet, of really restricting their dietary fats for whatever reason or reasons, can have a lot of issues with inflammation. And this is something that is not super talked about, and it's very relevant. And we also I don't see tons of low fat propaganda around, especially not nowadays. We don't often see that. I would say it's more rare than anything else, but fat's really important. I also would never recommend if you eat anything and you choose to go for a low fat or no fat version, highly recommend go back to the original version. They replace that fat with other things to make it taste good. Fat does absolutely make things taste good. Fats are not the enemy as long as they are in proportion to everything else that we're doing and eating. Very high fat diets, things like keto, often not great for the body long term for a variety of reasons. And fat's super important. And I also know that some people, especially if you've had your gallbladder removed, can sometimes have a really challenging time with dietary fat. And once again, this is not your body signal of saying, don't eat fat. It is a requirement to have fat in our diet. You can absolutely die not having enough fat. And the question is, can your body digest it? And if you do not have a gallbladder and are not supporting your body not having a gallbladder, no, you cannot digest fats. You have lost that capacity to do that because the gallbladder is a very important organ when it comes to digesting fats with something called bile. So that's a really big role here. So fat's super important. And I'm not saying fats like go to McDonald's and have like man, it's been so long since I've been to McDonald's. I can't even remember what their main Big Mac. There we go. Okay, and eat a Big Mac. Dietary fats, oftentimes big resources when we look at this. Most animal-based proteins have some fat in them, so we're getting it there. Nuts and seeds have fat. Any sort of oils, avocado oil, olive oil, butter, duck fat, tallow. I'm still not on the seed oils are good for us kind of train. They are highly processed food, which I don't know as though any highly processed food is the best for us. I think things that are more natural tend to be a little bit better. So I don't love that process. Things like canola oil, vegetable oil, I'm not on board with those being the best for us. And I think there are way better alternatives, even though there are many studies showing that do not have a negative impact. Don't love most of these studies and how they were performed and the longevity of them. So I think those are important things to think about whenever we look at studies. Also, don't think seed oils are the enemy by themselves. I think it's part of a bigger picture of what else are we putting in our body. So other things that may be a little bit fattier, avocado, good source of fat. Those are the big ones that come to mind. And I'm just thinking of, dairy, very good source of fat. Not everyone can process dairy. If you do tolerate dairy, the least amount of processing available in whatever dairy product you're talking about, usually better. I was just thinking, as I'm looking at my coffee cup, I drink a little bit of coconut milk in my coffee. That would be a fat. So there's a variety of fats here. Fats are good for us. They are necessary for us, and they help in resolve the inflammatory process and help in that healing process that we go through. So inflammation in and of itself, not a bad sign. And it's a signal that something's going on in our body. And the question is, if it's been around for a long time, that is absolutely something that we need to dive deeper into, and you should not have to deal with and or suffer from, especially long term here. So let's talk about blood work. And we're looking at inflammatory markers. I'm also seeing a rise in this, and I am on board with this. And it is also one of those things that Is it the highest of priorities? In my opinion, no. Not that I think it's not something to look at. And once again, is it the highest level of priority? I also don't think so. And that is checking your omegas and or omega ratios within your blood work. I'm seeing more and more functional practitioners do this. Yes, we have a couple panels that can look at this. They are expensive or more expensive than a lot of other types of panels. But once again, for me, like if your omega-3 to omega-6 ratio and or omega-9 ratio is off, is that the root cause of your inflammation? Probably not for the average person. Now, if we've looked at everything else, if we've addressed toxin load and gut health and hormones and sleep and nutrition and nervous system work and all these other things, and your body's in a pretty good spot, and maybe we're still struggling with inflammation, which is very unlikely, and let's just say for this scenario it's a possibility, then I think it's a great time to look at your omega ratios. Let's fine tune this even more. Absolutely. If you've got the extra financial ability to do so, of course, it's not going to hurt. And there are things that we could do to help and support that. And once again, this is not the highest priority for me when most functional practitioners are looking at this, especially right away. They're trying to find all of the things that are wrong and supplement you to death with all of these things. I mean, I can't even remember a single person where right off the bat we have recommended some sort of omega style product for them. Now, if someone came in and was already taking it, totally fine. Let's make sure it's a good quality product. Other than that, though, is it the highest priority? Probably not. And, if someone's coming off of a very recent like head injury, I might have a little bit of a different answer for you because once again, that's an acute injury, but I'm talking our chronically ill, lots of symptoms going on for a long time kind of clients that we typically deal with. I cannot think of a single one where I was like, this is absolutely where we need to start. I'm like, no, yeah, let's look at this down the road. I think it's a great long-term supplement to be on. I think a multivitamin is another great long-term supplement to be on. Do we absolutely need to be on it? No, especially not at the beginning. So I kind of float in and out of some of this. I recently got a product for free. So I am on an omega-3 supplement right now. Will I stay on it? Probably not. I don't notice a big difference. I eat quite the variety of fats as well within my diet. Do I get all of my omega-3s? I don't know, but I also don't have symptoms of long-term inflammation. And if I happen to get them, yeah, great. I'll tell you, I have not noticed a single difference since I started taking these, and they are good quality. I've done the research and have a variety of different tools and understanding of sourcing and all that kind of stuff, and it's a great product. However, for someone like my partner who has had 2 traumatic brain injuries, who still has long-term impacts from those traumatic brain injuries, yeah, he is on a fish oil supplement, an omega-3 supplement, long term, and he does higher dosages. Like that would be an exception. Where for him, it does feel really supportive. And we've tested it where let's go without it. Let's try out some different brands. And we figured out what works best for him. And this is where individuality comes in. And if you are working with someone who just blanket runs all of these same tests and recommends all of these same supplements to their patients or clients, run away, run far away. Because why do we need to be on 10, 15, 20 supplements just to symptom manage everything when we're not even looking at the root causes? So those are big red flags when we're looking at this. But once again, not a bad thing necessarily. And if we're doing a very specific protocol, I don't often like to be on extra stuff unless it's really doing a lot. For example, let's say we're actively going through a protocol and someone is struggling with sleep, they just have a lot of stress. We're probably going to recommend magnesium glycinate specifically. We might test for it. Someone may have already come in with testing for it. However, we can also really extrapolate that if they're a female, they have a stressful life and they have all these chronic issues going on, and we're supporting their body and helping them get these right conditions for healing for these long-term chronic issues. And we're looking at the bigger root causes, and they're struggling to sleep. They're struggling to manage stress. Yeah, magnesium's pretty much a safe bet, and it's going to help, and they're going to notice and feel a difference. If they don't, we're probably not going to stay on it, because why we don't need to be on extra stuff. The goal is here not to put supplements that someone doesn't actually need onto them, especially not long term. For me, yeah, I'm on magnesium again. I check my levels yearly. I kind of float in and out as I continue to go through different periods of higher stress in my life. Yeah, I go on and off of it. I do test it every year. I'll say last year I was a little bit low, but I'll also say I was higher than the year before. So I think it's good for me at this moment. I do not stay on it forever, though. There are very few things I stay on very consistently forever. A multivitamin would probably be that exception that I'm consistently on. So value in it and not absolutely necessary. I will say one of the main companies that I really like and trust when it comes to fatty acids and the quality of their products is Nordic Naturals. We do not have a specific affiliation with them. They are on Fullscript, which we use, and I'll share the link below for that. I'll say I've used a lot of their different omega-3 fatty acid type supplements. And I don't know if I've not ever loved one of their products. And I've personally taken their cod liver oil. I've taken a variety of their omega-3 supplements. I'm just a big fan. And they're third party tested. There's no taste to their products, which I really appreciate. I mean, the cod liver oil, if you get straight cod liver oil, yeah, there's absolutely a little bit of a taste, but there's a lot of things you don't need. It's your omega-3, and I like the quality. I like that it doesn't taste fishy. I also like that you can freeze them as well if you want to even get, I mean, I've never noticed any sort of fish burps after using any of their products, which is very, very common. So I do really like them, and I'll put their name below as well, along with a link to Fullscript in case you want to check them out. You can also just get them at other places, which I won't name. Just make sure it comes from a reputable supplier and you're actually getting the real version of it. If it tastes like fish, I can almost guarantee that it's not from the actual company itself and it's from a knockoff that is not accurate. So when we look at labs, we look at inflammation, and we can look at a variety of different inflammation markers. And there's some ones that I'll mention here that are very obvious that I think many people come in already understanding that that's an inflammation marker. And I have some really surprising ones as well here. So probably the first three might be more common, you may be more aware of. The first one's an acute inflammation marker, so short-term inflammation, and that is CRP. And that's a really common one. And there are two versions of this marker. C-reactive protein is what it is. There's hsCRP and then there's regular CRP. It is important to know which one you are getting run because our ranges for both of those are different. If you have the option, get the hsCRP. It is a highly sensitive C-reactive protein. That's what the HS stands for. Gives us better information. It's more sensitive, gives us just better information. If we're running hsCRP, that value should be under 1. If we're looking at US units, I cannot remember off the top of my head if international units are the same or not. My initial thought is yes, and I'm also acknowledging I might be wrong. So we have CRP as a very acute inflammatory marker. We also have ESR, which is another really, really common one. And this one, so mostly we abbreviate this with SED rate. I'm not going to try and pronounce the first word of ESR. It is very complicated to pronounce, and I don't trust my pronunciation. I don't know if I've ever pronounced it. I usually just say SED rate. if we are generally talking about this. Sed rate, generally speaking, should be under 10 for women. Not great marker by itself. It is best used in conjunction looking at the bigger picture, especially CRP. So very valuable there. Also for reference, so reference range for women is under 10. For men, it is under 5. Women, we naturally have a little bit higher inflammatory response, and this is why there is a differentiation for this one specifically. This is not all markers. This is a handful of markers when it comes to inflammation. This would be one of them, would be the SED rate. Men should be under 5. So we work mostly with women. We gear most of our information towards women and women's health. So that's typically why I will make the differentiation. However, for most women, it should be under 10. We also want to look at homocysteine. That is another really common one. Once again, this is looking at longer term inflammation. It does not give us a reason why inflammation is happening, but it does give us the idea that there is inflammation happening. And all of these, by the way, are non-specific. They're just like, hey, there's inflammation going on, which valuable. So we can unpack that a little bit more and understand once again, like how and why is this inflammatory response happening in the first place. So we've got CRP, ideally hsCRP. We've got SED rate. We've got homocysteine. Those are the most common ones I will say that most people know. Just because we talk about this quite a bit now, ferritin often is better used. I was choosing my words very carefully there. Often better used as an inflammation marker than anything else. Inflammation directly impacts ferritin in a very big way. So if you want to dive deeper into the ferritin piece, please go back and listen to the episode from just a few weeks ago where I talk about iron and ferritin kind of levels. And I think it's called Iron and Ferritin is the name of the episode. It'll say iron, maybe iron, ferritin, and anemia. It was the full name of that. So go listen to that and you'll get a better understanding as to why ferritin by itself, terrible when it comes to true iron status within the body. We also can look at, and this is one that's run for pretty much everyone, is white blood cell count. That can show us an inflammation response. That can also show us a variety of other things. Specifically, when it's elevated is when it's more indicative of inflammation. Now, white blood cell count is an immune marker, so this can be tied to infection as well. So it's important, once again, like details matter here. And anytime I see a high white blood cell count, I'm always going to ask the question of, at the time that these labs were run, were you actively sick? Like, were you fighting an infection? Were you fighting a cold? Like, were you fighting anything that could have thrown off this marker to make it elevated? I will say, like, the last time I ran my labs was when I was actively dealing with some sort of like food poisoning, gut infection, and my white blood cell count was through the roof. It was over 10, if I remember correctly, which is super, super high. 6, by the way, is the high end that we typically use. And alongside with that, we will usually see with an acute infection, once again, one of the differential markers very elevated. So for me, mine was bacterial in nature. And so my neutrophils were sky high. I mean, they were like 76 or 77%, which 60% is the high end that we use. So it was crazy. Or 3.25 is the high end if we're looking at the absolute value. Can't remember what my absolute value was. I think it was like 5 point something if I remember correctly. Once again, don't totally remember off the top of my head, but it was very, very, very elevated, which is how I knew it really was a bacterial infection between all my labs and then also my symptoms. So white blood cell count can also be another good one. Another kind of sneaky one that actually, you know what, before I dive into that, there's another one that I don't see run often. I just don't see run often, and that's fibrinogen. Fibrinogen. Oftentimes when we're looking at deeper levels of anemia, when there's not an more obvious kind of answer as to why, we will run fibrinogen. Uh, because that can help us get a better understanding. There is an iron connection, although arguably it's more of an inflammation marker than anything else. Um, it can also be related to cardiovascular health and clotting factors. So we do have to take some of we've once again, it's never about just one marker. We have to look at the whole picture altogether. I will say hematologists typically will run that marker probably more than anyone. So I've seen a couple cardiologists run it, but I would probably say hematologist is the most common person I've seen run that marker specifically, obviously outside of us, and we don't run that super often. That also may be helpful in deciding for us whether more natural routes to combat temporary acute inflammation, something like a proteolytic enzyme, which I'll talk about here. So this episode is actually just going to be about inflammation, is where we're going with this. I just realized how long I have been recording so far. And like, oh, we're not going to talk about pain today. We're just going to talk about inflammation. Couple other markers that we might look at. And these are very specific cases, oftentimes. Whole blood histamine levels is another one that would be indicative of obviously some histamine issues, which is a symptom, but can also give us a little bit of an idea of the role of histamine in inflammation, in an inflammatory response. And once again, then we need to peel back those layers as to, okay, if someone has a very high whole blood histamine levels, which are indicative of a lot of inflammation going on in the body, why? What is going on? We want to look at things like toxin load, especially mold, mast cell issues. We want to look at hormone levels. Estrogen and histamine have a direct correlation with each other and present as a negative feedback loop with each other. So as histamine rises, estrogen rises. As estrogen rises, histamine levels rise, and it can create a very challenging loop to break if we don't look at the whole picture altogether and understand why all of that is happening all at once. So it's another one we may look at when it comes to inflammation, specific inflammation. Okay, now here's the real juicy one that I really have to explain this a lot when I go over labs that we run, especially certain panels where we run both of these markers. Also, before I start sharing this, please hear me out as to the reasoning behind this. Vitamin D can be used as an inflammation marker. And vitamin D is really misunderstood in both Western medicine and in many cases functional medicine as well. And in 2020, this whole like low vitamin D level and everything became very popular. And many functional practitioners will recommend quote unquote optimal levels of vitamin D. And they're talking about for reference. And this is how I know they do not really know what they are talking about. 25 OHD, which is the standard vitamin D marker that is run, especially in Western medicine. Not a good indication of real vitamin D levels within the cells itself. And that's really where we want the vitamin D to be. That's where it has its most vital impact, is within our cells. And here's a big reason why. So there's actually 2 vitamin D markers. And the reason why the second vitamin D marker is usually not run, and once again, like unless you have a really deep understanding of vitamin D and vitamin D metabolism and the whole process that it goes through, Vitamin D, the 25-OHD, so the one that's normally run, that is actually not what gets into our cells. It has to be converted to another form of vitamin D called 1,25-dihydroxyvitamin D, or calcitriol. The reason most practitioners are not running the second marker is because they should be the same. And a healthy, optimal health person, these two markers should be literally the exact same number. And especially in our practice, if you're going to see your physician, if you're going to see a practitioner and wanting these labs because you think something is wrong, why would we not run both? Unless it's a financial issue, which that I totally get. But why would we not run both? Because both are important. And if we're only looking at one, those two are probably not going to be the same. And I will say anytime we run both markers for clients within our practice, 98+% of the time, those numbers are not the same and are not close to the same number. And so we want these sky high 25-OHD marker numbers, which would mean 60 to 100 is the range most practitioners use. Somewhere within that range, sometimes it's 60 to 80, sometimes it's 70 to 100. It really depends. The problem, especially if you have chronic health issues, is you have to then convert all of that, which puts a lot of pressure on your kidneys. It also takes a lot of nutrients. Two big nutrients that it requires are magnesium, which many people, especially if you have chronic health issues, it's very stressful. You're burning through magnesium at much higher rates than the average person. So do you have enough magnesium to spare? Maybe not. Probably not, if we're being realistic. Another one is zinc. Zinc is a really, really important nutrient. Never take zinc by itself. Zinc and copper ratios are hugely important, and you can really throw those numbers off just supplementing with zinc. But zinc plays a massive role in a lot of different things. Stomach acid production is a really big one. Absorbing iron is a really big one. But so does this vitamin D conversion. And so we can very easily end up with a zinc deficiency and or a zinc and copper ratio issue with these very high levels of vitamin D. Because what will often happen is, let's say we're at for easy sake, like a 75 for our 25-OHD. The second marker is usually going to be higher. So if we're at a 75, let's say we're at 100, 125. I don't think 100 is probably close. It would probably be closer to be 125 for most chronically ill people. Then that vitamin D is just sitting there because it's not actually being absorbed into our cells, which means that we keep putting more and more and more in vitamin D into our body. Our body's converting it and converting it and converting it, but then it's just staying there and it's depleting nutrients and it's causing stress because you have all of this extra vitamin D that is not actually being absorbed into your cells for your cells to actually be able to use. So now you have excess vitamin D running around, which is not good for the body. And vitamin D is stored. So it's a fat-soluble vitamin, so it's actually stored within our body. So this can really add up over time. It can cause issues with your immune system. It can hide immune system issues. People who have autoimmune issues, and once again, I say this from personal experience, and also having worked with hundreds and hundreds of clients with autoimmune diseases, it can hide and mask your symptoms, which in the moment may feel okay, but now you're exacerbating an already pretty high priority level issue. Autoimmunity is pretty high priority. It is also a symptom. The question is why? What is triggering the immune system? And then if you're hiding all of those symptoms with high doses of vitamin D, that's a lot of stress on the body. Not good. Not good for the body. So it's really important that we if we look at the research, if we really dig into the research and the studies around optimal vitamin D levels, 25 to 50 is where most of them are landing. We could argue up to 55. I don't know if I remember correctly, it's been a minute, but most research does not go below 25, but 25 to 50, 55, very acceptable ranges. We do not need to be over supplementing, and this can cause a lot of other health issues, including inflammatory issues. This can also hide underlying inflammatory issues, which once again may mask symptoms, and we can cause more damage long term by hiding some of these issues and not really addressing them. So those are other inflammatory markers that we can look at that aren't necessarily normal or standard inflammation level markers. There's also, I'll also say, we can talk about inflammation in various parts of our body. We can talk about liver inflammation. So we could talk about thyroid inflammation and an inflamed thyroid. It's like, okay, specifically, well, what's going on with the thyroid? Why is it swollen? And some people with thyroid issues can actually feel when their thyroid is flaring up, and they'll be able to feel, if you're not watching, I'm like grabbing the bottom of my throat. You can actually feel it. And I've had plenty of people like, I know when my thyroid is inflamed. I know when I'm dealing with inflammation and it's directly impacting my thyroid health because I can feel it. Which, yeah, absolutely can happen. Chronic viral issues cause a lot of inflammation. I'll tell you, I mean, like when I had like really rampant EBV and cytomegalovirus issues, I mean, my lymph nodes were swollen all of the time because my body was constantly inflamed. It was constantly fighting these chronic infection and chronic viral type issues that were going on with my body. So yeah, of course, once again, inflammation is not the problem. The question is why and how is it resulting in the first place? So I think I'm going to pause there. I do want to mention just a few supplements that can help if you are super inflamed, may temporarily help. And these are band-aids at best. So we really, really, really need to look at the bigger picture and understand why and how is this inflammation happening in the first place. I'll say, especially for acute issues, one of my favorite things is a proteolytic enzyme. And a proteolytic enzyme is often a digestive enzyme. It's a specific kind of digestive enzyme that when taken on empty away from food, acts as a way to almost eat away at inflammation. So, for example, I actually was in a secondary car accident a few years after my car accident that set everything off. And I felt it in my back. It was not the same. My body was already in a much better place going into this. And I could feel it. I could feel like the old injury flaring up a little bit. So I took a proteolytic enzymes for about 5 days kind of post accident. And I do feel like it helped and made a big difference because it's just naturally almost eating away at this inflammation. So my favorite proteolytic enzyme, and once again, I'll put the name of these. I'm just going to put Nordic Naturals, the name of the company. This one is a specific product. So it's called Intenzyme Forte, and it's from Biotics. Once again, no direct affiliation. Yes, it's on Fullscript. We're going to put the generic Fullscript link in the show notes, so feel free to go check that out. You do get 15% off if you want, just by using our Fullscript account. I try, once again, we make almost no money off of supplements, and so we try and pass on discounts when and where we can. So we do 15% off for non-clients, for general population when it comes to our Fullscript account. Clients do get a bigger discount, by the way. So Intenzyme Forte. So you take these on empty, so away from meals. If you take them with meals, it's going to act as a digestive enzyme. Full reference. So we take this away and it can really help reduce pain. I used to take it, you can take it upwards. It really depends on the issue and the person, but for those 5 days, I was almost taking it like NSAIDs, where I would take it every 4, 5, 6 hours in between meals. I would take it usually first thing when I woke up, depending on how I was feeling in the morning, maybe a little bit before lunch or mid-afternoon, and then before bed. So anywhere between like 3 to 6 times a day is when I was taking them. And anywhere between, for this particular proteolytic enzyme, anywhere between 6 to 10. And they're teeny, they're like almost like candy. I mean, teeny tiny little, they're not capsules, just basic pills that they come in. So, and it once again just like naturally helped reduce, and I didn't have to take any sort of ibuprofen, Advil, anything like that. And I felt like it actually helped resolve some of the localized inflammation that was going on. So I do like a proteolytic enzyme. Another one that is often used, we don't use this one super often, except for when we're going through a gut rebuilding protocol after we've done a lot of killing and things like that. For some people who we can tell they're still having some inflammatory issues, especially gut inflammatory issues, we'll use a turmeric or curcumin based supplement. I don't have a particular one. I think it really depends on the person. I think it depends on what we're dealing with, but turmeric and or curcumin can be a valuable resource. Curcumin, sorry. Spelling is challenging. Just trying to take notes so I remember to put these in the show notes. So we're turmeric or curcumin based product. If you have also, this is actually becoming more and more maybe more and more common. I know I've seen a few non-fitness or non-health and wellness influencers or non-direct health and wellness practitioners talk about this. You can also make what's called golden milk. And this is often used postpartum to help the body heal. This can be used to help with breast milk supply. This can also it can help through fighting illness as well, but it has turmeric in it. It's a milk-based milk, quote unquote milk, dairy or non-dairy based, depending on who you are. And I used to take this. I used to drink this when I would get sick, which would be very frequently when I was chronically struggling and going through all my chronic issues. But golden milk, you can look up recipes online, and this can be helpful. Once again, should someone be on this forever? Well, if you've got super chronic inflammatory issues, I mean, if it helps, great. And maybe let's not waste money on taking this thing that's helping, but it's a band-aid at best. So once again, like short term, I think some of these things are fine. Long term, I don't love any of these things because we need to get a better understanding of, once again, how and why are these things happening in the first place and what needs to be addressed in order to combat this chronic inflammatory response that our body is presenting with. I will say the gut does play a big role in a lot of people's chronic inflammatory issues. I do not think it is the only thing, and I do think it does play a big role in it for a lot of people. When we also think about gut health and go to our gut health masterclass, if you haven't watched that and looking to dive deeper into gut health, is not only do we need to look at the gut if we're going to look at the gut, but we also need to look at all of the things that impact the gut. And that's where most practitioners get it wrong, is they're not looking at all of the things that impact the gut. They're just looking at the gut itself. So things like SIBO, yeast and fungal overgrowth issues, I would even argue potentially like parasitic overgrowth issues, any sort of issues with food sensitivities, gut inflammation, quote unquote leaky gut. All of these things are inflammatory responses for the most part and are gut issues, and they never come by themselves. Any sort of quote unquote SIBO experts or candida experts, if they are not looking at all of the root causes of SIBO, of candida, of yeast and fungal issues, please run so fast, because those are all symptoms. If you don't look at the hows and the whys that those happen in the first place, that's why they can be very challenging to heal and to deal with. And we see this especially with SIBO. We get a lot of people that come to us with SIBO who have seen SIBO specialists, who have been on multiple rounds of medication, who have done multiple rounds of herbal protocols, and it keeps coming back. And the reason is they haven't addressed the how and the why that it got there in the first place. And that varies person to person, just by the way. But that gut health masterclass, which is free, It's about a 2-hour-long masterclass for reference too. It really goes over the hows and the whys and how to start to look at some of this stuff. And this is a lot of the work that we do with many of our clients. Not all of our clients have gut issues, but many, many, many of our clients do have gut issues. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. If you guys want me to dive deeper into pain, chronic pain issues, or dive into specific areas of inflammatory issues, always please let us know. Happy to do any topics that are of interest to you. You can always DM us. You can leave a comments anywhere on any social media platform or send us an email, info@trifectacollective.net. Thank you for joining. As always, please like, subscribe, follow. If it resonates, 5-star reviews really, really, really mean the world to us. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.